I never thought I'd be the one holding my brother's darkest secret, but here I am, trying to figure out if I should destroy his life, or let him live with the guilt forever. My brother Jack and I had always been close, closer than most brothers, really. We shared everything growing up, our toys, our room, our teenage dreams of running away from our small town and making it big. We were each other's confidants, sounding boards, and occasionally, partners in crime. Jack had this easygoing charm that I always envied. He could walk into a room full of strangers and, within minutes, have everyone laughing, drawn to him like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, I was always the quieter one, the guy in the background who preferred to observe and listen. But that dynamic worked for us. He was the star, and I was his silent support system. When he met Emily, it was like everything finally clicked for him. He'd had his share of relationships, sure, but nothing like this. Emily was special, everyone knew it. She had a warmth about her, a kindness that wasn't forced or performative. She was a natural nurturer, a teacher at the local elementary school, and kids adored her. It didn't take long for the rest of our family to fall in love with her, too. She was the kind of woman who made you believe in the whole idea of soulmates. When they got married 2 years ago, I was his best man, and I remember standing there during the vows, feeling genuinely happy for them. I thought, if anyone deserved this kind of love, it was Jack. But life has a funny way of taking even the most beautiful things and twisting them into something ugly when you least expect it. The first sign that something was off came a few months ago. It was small, barely noticeable at first. Jack started staying late at work more often than usual. He worked at an investment firm, and the hours could be brutal, especially since he was gunning for a promotion. I figured that was all it was, ambition, the need to climb the corporate ladder. But then he started missing Sunday dinners at Mom and Dad's. Jack never missed family dinners, not unless something serious was going on. Even when he was swamped with work, he'd always make time to stop by, even if it was just for a quick hello. At first, I didn't think too much of it. People get busy, life happens. But then I started noticing how Emily had changed. She wasn't the same vibrant, smiling woman who had lit up our family gatherings. She seemed quieter, more withdrawn. She'd smile, but it never quite reached her eyes, and she'd sit at the dinner table staring off into space, like she was somewhere else entirely. One night, after dinner, I caught her standing outside on the porch, staring at the sky. I joined her, leaning on the railing, trying to figure out how to ask the question that had been eating at me for weeks. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She glanced at me, her eyes tired. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess." I waited, hoping she'd say more, but she didn't. She just sighed and rubbed her arms like she was cold, even though it was a warm summer night. "Jack's been working a lot lately," I said, testing the waters. Emily nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stars. "Yeah. He's trying to make partner." There was something in her tone, something flat and resigned, that made me feel uneasy. I wanted to ask her more, to dig deeper, but I didn't. It wasn't my place. At least, that's what I told myself. A few weeks later, Jack and I were hanging out, just the two of us, like old times. We'd gone out for a couple of beers, and I could tell something was weighing on him. He was quieter than usual, distracted. It wasn't like him. Usually, Jack was the life of the party, the guy who cracked jokes and kept the conversation going. But that night, he was different, withdrawn, almost somber. After a couple more beers, the truth finally came out. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Jack said, his voice low, almost like he didn't want me to hear him. I frowned, not sure what he was talking about. "Do what?" "Marriage. Life. All of it," he muttered, staring into his glass. I stared at him, shocked. Jack had always been the one who had it all together. He had the perfect job, the perfect wife, the perfect life, or so it seemed. "What the hell are you talking about? You've got everything, man. What's going on?" He didn't look at me. Instead, he stared at the bar, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. "I've been seeing someone," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What do you mean, seeing someone?" "You're married, Jack." He ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. I know. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just did." I was furious. "You've got to be kidding me. Emily is the best thing that's ever happened to you, and you're throwing it all away? For what?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The guilt on his face said it all. For the next few weeks, I was stuck in this weird limbo. I didn't know what to do with the information Jack had dropped on me. I felt like I was betraying Emily just by knowing. Every time I saw her, I wanted to tell her, to warn her, but I couldn't. Jack had sworn me to secrecy, and as much as I hated what he was doing, he was still my brother. But things were getting worse. Emily's mood was darkening, and it was clear that she knew something was off. She wasn't the kind of woman to sit back and ignore the signs. She started asking questions, subtle at first, but more direct as the weeks went on. "Has Jack mentioned anything to you?" she asked me one evening as I helped her clean up after dinner at my parents' house. I froze, unsure of how to answer. "About what?" She shrugged, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I don't know. He's been so distant lately. I feel like there's something he's not telling me." I hated lying to her. It made me feel sick to my stomach. But what could I say? I wasn't ready to blow Jack's life up, not yet. "I'm sure it's just work," I said, forcing a smile. "You know how he gets when he's stressed about his job." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded, dropping the subject, for the moment, at least. Things came to a head one night when I was out with Jack again. We were sitting at the bar, like we had been a few weeks earlier, but this time the tension between us was palpable. I could barely look at him without feeling disgusted. How could he be so casual about what he was doing? Didn't he realize the damage he was causing? "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Jack admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I care about Rachel, but I still love Emily." I wanted to punch him. How could he sit there and say he loved Emily while he was sleeping with another woman? "You need to make a choice, Jack," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You can't have both." He nodded, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I know. I don't know how to fix this." The answer was so obvious to me. He needed to end things with Rachel and come clean to Emily. But it wasn't my life, and as much as I hated it, it wasn't my decision to make. A week later, everything fell apart. Emily showed up at my apartment one evening, her eyes red from crying. She didn't have to say a word, I already knew. "He told me," she said, her voice cracking. "He finally told me everything." My heart sank. I had been dreading this moment, and now that it was here, I didn't know what to say. Emily collapsed onto my couch, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. I sat down beside her, feeling completely helpless. I wanted to comfort her, to make it better, but there was nothing I could do to fix this. "I trusted him," she choked out between sobs. "I trusted him, and he betrayed me." I put a hand on her shoulder, unsure of what else to do. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't know. I didn't know how to tell you." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. It's his. He's the one who did this." I stayed with her that night, sitting in silence as she cried herself to sleep on my couch. I couldn't help but feel like I had failed both of them, failed Jack by not stopping him sooner, and failed Emily by not telling her the truth when I had the chance. The fallout was ugly. Emily filed for divorce, and Jack moved out of their house. Their once perfect marriage was reduced to a pile of legal paperwork and bitter arguments. Jack tried to make things work with Rachel, but it didn't last. Whatever they had, it wasn't real. It couldn't survive the wreckage of his marriage. As for me, I was stuck in the middle. My relationship with Jack was strained, to say the least. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it was awkward and stilted. I couldn't forgive him for what he had done, not just to Emily, but to all of us. He had shattered the image of the perfect life we all thought he had. Emily, on the other hand, was slowly rebuilding her life. She moved back in with her parents for a while, took some time off work to heal, and eventually started dating again. It was weird seeing her with someone else, but I was happy for her. She deserved better than what Jack had given her. Months passed, and life moved on, as it always does. But even now, every time I see Jack at family gatherings, there's a tension between us that wasn't there before. We'll never be as close as we once were, and that's something I've had to come to terms with. Betrayal has a way of changing everything, and some things just can't be undone. It wasn't the affair that broke me, it was the realization that my father had been living a double life, and I was the last one to know. My father, Alan, was a man I'd always admired. He was the kind of dad who woke up early on Saturday mornings to make pancakes, took us on spontaneous road trips, and always seemed to know what to say when things got tough. He ran his own construction company, a small but successful business in our Ohio suburb, and to me, he was a symbol of what a hardworking man should be. Growing up, my brother Eric and I never wanted for much. Sure, we weren't rich, but Dad always made sure we had everything we needed and more. He was the glue that held our family together, a pillar of strength, wisdom, and compassion. At least, that's what I always thought. My parents, Alan and Susan, were high school sweethearts. They'd been married for over 30 years, and to anyone looking in from the outside, their relationship was flawless. They were the kind of couple that seemed to defy the odds. Even after all those years, they still held hands when they walked down the street, shared a bottle of wine on the porch in the evenings, and danced in the kitchen to old love songs. I always thought they were one of those rare couples that were truly happy, the kind of love you read about in books or see in movies. I always thought my parents would be together forever. But I guess that's the thing about love and marriage, it's never as perfect as it seems. It all started on a Sunday afternoon. I'd stopped by my parents' house to help out with some minor repairs, just as I often did on the weekends. Dad had been complaining about a leaky faucet in the kitchen for weeks, and I figured it would be an easy fix. Mom was in the living room, catching up on one of her crime dramas, and Dad was in the garage, tinkering with something, as usual. It was a typical, lazy Sunday, the kind we'd had countless times before. As I was rummaging through the toolbox, I heard Mom call out from the living room, asking Dad to grab her phone from the dining room table. I was closer, so I picked it up on my way through the kitchen. That's when I saw it. The screen lit up as I lifted the phone, and a text message from someone named Liz popped up on the screen. The message preview was short, just a small snippet, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. "Miss you already, babe." I froze. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. Mom wasn't the kind of woman who sent messages like that, especially not to someone named Liz. My parents were happy, or at least, that's what I had always believed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, my mind racing. Was Mom having an affair? Had I misjudged her all these years? But before I could make sense of it, Mom's voice called out again, asking for her phone. I handed it to her without saying a word, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, and I didn't know what to say. Should I confront her about the message? Should I just let it go? A part of me wanted to believe it was nothing, that there was some simple explanation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the message. "Miss you already, babe." The words echoed in my mind, keeping me awake long after I'd gone to bed. I tried to tell myself that it was probably just a misunderstanding, that I was reading too much into it. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Something was wrong, and I needed to find out what. The next day, I called my brother Eric. We weren't the kind of brothers who talked every day, but we were close enough. Growing up, we'd been each other's biggest allies and biggest rivals, constantly competing for Dad's attention. As adults, we drifted apart a bit, but we still had a bond that couldn't be broken. When I told Eric about the text message, he wasn't as surprised as I expected him to be. "Honestly, I've had a bad feeling about Dad for a while now," Eric admitted. "I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure, but I've noticed he's been acting strange lately." That threw me for a loop. I had been so focused on Mom that I hadn't even considered that Dad might be involved. Could it be that Dad was the one having an affair? The thought made me sick to my stomach. My father was the man I had always looked up to, the man I had aspired to be. The idea that he could be capable of betraying my mother like that was unthinkable. "Do you think we should confront him?" I asked, still reeling from the possibility. "I don't know," Eric replied, his voice hesitant. "Let's keep an eye on things for now. Maybe it's nothing, but if it's something, we'll deal with it." Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I saw my dad, I found myself scrutinizing his every move, looking for signs that he was hiding something. At first, I felt guilty for being so suspicious, but the more I watched, the more convinced I became that something was going on. Dad was more distant than usual, more distracted. He seemed to be spending more time at work, and when he was home, he was glued to his phone, constantly texting or checking emails. One evening, I decided to follow him. It felt wrong, like I was betraying him by not trusting him, but I needed answers. If he was having an affair, I needed to know. I needed to protect my mom, to figure out what was going on before everything fell apart. Dad left the house around 7 p.m., telling Mom he had to go back to the office to finish up some paperwork. That in itself wasn't unusual. He often worked late, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd used the same excuse one too many times. I waited a few minutes after he left, then got in my car and followed him. He didn't go to the office. Instead, he drove across town to a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. My heart sank as I watched him pull into the parking lot and get out of his truck. A woman was waiting for him outside one of the rooms. Even from a distance, I could tell it was the same woman whose name had appeared on Mom's phone, Liz. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My father, the man I had idolized my entire life, was standing there, in front of me, with another woman. He kissed her, pulled her into his arms like they were lovers, and disappeared into the motel room. I sat in my car, numb, staring at the door for what felt like an eternity. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him right then and there? Should I drive home and tell my mom? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, like everything I thought I knew about my family had been a lie. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, over and over again. My father was having an affair, and I had no idea how to handle it. I knew I couldn't keep it a secret, but the thought of destroying my family was unbearable. How could I tell my mom? How could I break her heart like that? And what about Eric? Should I tell him? Would he believe me? The next day, I called Eric and told him what I'd seen. He didn't seem surprised. I had a feeling, he said, his voice cold. I knew something was going on. Dad's been acting off for months. I just didn't want to believe it. What do we do? I asked, feeling lost. We tell Mom, Eric said without hesitation. She deserves to know the truth. I knew he was right, but the thought of sitting my mom down and telling her that her husband, the man she had loved for over 30 years, was cheating on her made me feel physically ill. We decided to confront Dad first, to give him a chance to come clean. Maybe it was cowardly, but I hoped that if he admitted to the affair himself, it would soften the blow when we told Mom. Maybe he could explain it in a way that made sense, in a way that didn't destroy everything. We met him at the house one evening when Mom was out. I could tell he knew something was up as soon as he walked through the door. He glanced between Eric and me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cautious. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything, about the text message I'd seen on Mom's phone, about following him to the motel, about Liz. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at the floor, his face pale. Then he sank into the armchair, his hands shaking as he buried his face in them. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Dad admitted to the affair. He didn't try to deny it or make excuses. He told us that it had been going on for over a year, that he had met Liz through work, and that it had started as something casual, something meaningless. But over time, it had become more than that. He had fallen in love with her, and he didn't know how to stop. Eric and I sat there, listening in stunned silence. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him how he could do this to us, to Mom. But all I could do was sit there, numb, as the life I'd known unraveled before my eyes. Dad promised he would end it. He said he loved Mom, that he didn't want to lose her. But I didn't know if I believed him. How could I trust anything he said after what I'd seen? The next day, we told Mom. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. She didn't cry, not at first. She just sat there, staring at us, as if she couldn't comprehend what we were saying. Then, slowly, the tears came. I felt like I had betrayed her, like I had ripped her heart out. But I knew she deserved the truth. She deserved to know what had been happening behind her back. In the weeks that followed, everything fell apart. Dad moved out, and Mom filed for divorce. Eric and I tried to be there for her, but it was hard. We were both dealing with our own feelings of betrayal and loss. The father we had looked up to, the man we had admired and respected, was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone we didn't recognize. I still see Dad from time to time. We've tried to rebuild our relationship, but it's not the same. How could it be? The trust is gone, and I don't know if it will ever come back. As for Mom, she's doing her best to move on. She's stronger than I ever realized, and I admire her for that. But I know she's still hurting. I don't think she'll ever fully recover from the betrayal. None of us will.